So just two quick words. First of all, the shir is for a refuah shlema.
The first time is from my mother.
Okay.
The second is from my mother, but now my granddaughter was just taking it really tall.
Hadassah bat Chana should have a quick refuah shlema. There's a famous drasha of Rabbi Akiva at the beginning of Esther Rabbah. Source number 1, that you have. Rabbi Akiva haya yoshev v'doresh v'nitnamnemu hatalmidim. Rabbi Akiva was giving a lesson, and his students started falling. He noticed his students were falling asleep. Can you imagine sitting in a shir with Rabbi Akiva and they're falling asleep? Nevertheless, that's what happened. Be'al le'ar'era, so he wanted to wake them up. Le'ar'era yaton. Amar, ma zachta Esther limloch al sheva ve'esrim u'mea medina. Now, presumably this was not the topic of his drasha, but he's trying to wake them up, so he says, Chavre, why did Esther merit to rule over 127 provinces? I don't know. They're all scratching their heads. I don't know. And he says, Ela kach amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tavo Esther, bita shel Sarai, shechayta sheva ve'esrim u'mea shana, v'timloch al sheva ve'esrim u'mea medina. That let Esther, who is the daughter of Sarai, okay, several generations in between, but she's the descendant of Sarai Imeinu, and she should rule over 127 Medinot because Sarah lived for 127 years. Now, presumably the message is she spent every moment of those years wisely. We know there's a drasha on the way that the years of her life were written in the Torah, that she was, every year of her life was spent well. And he's, giving them a little nudge, like, are you spending your time the way you should be? But there's definitely, there's more to it than that, because we're a little puzzled, like, what brought to mind Esther HaMalkah in connection with Sarai Imeinu? Why, yes, the 127. There's that number, 127. It's an unusual number. It's not like number 3 or number 7, which appear all over the place. 10, okay. 127, a little bit more unusual. It appears only in these two places. There must be some link between them. We see this teaching echoed, by the way, in the Targum, which I brought for you in source number 2. So you know my thing by now. Targum there's never in translation without interpretation, and nowhere is that more clear than in the Targum on Megillat Esther. And you can see just by looking at it, I gave you the Targum for Pasuk Aleph. It's a lot longer in Aramaic than in Hebrew, and that is because the Aramaic Targum, which literally means translation, on Megillat Esther interweaves a lot of midrashic material. So the Targum on Pasuk Aleph of the Megillah, Vayhi bimei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh, it wasn't the time of Achashverosh, the Achashverosh, the one we know, the Achashverosh, same one as the Achashverosh who stopped the building of the Beit HaMikdash after Koresh had given permission for the Jews to return from Bavel after they had, at the end of the exile, to start building the second Beit HaMikdash. Achashverosh stopped the building. Why did he stop the building? On the advice of his wife, Vashti. Why did it bother her? Because she was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, who had destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. So she doesn't want him building what her grandfather destroyed. Therefore, on her advice, the building of the Beit HaMikdash was stopped. And because of that, she was sentenced to death. And that's why in Perek Aleph of the Megillah, Vashti is put to death. That's the real reason why Vashti is put to death. According to this, she's put to death. In the Pasuk, it just says she's never again to come before Achashverosh. So if your grandchildren are in Gan in this country, or children or siblings, don't tell them that she was put to death, because the Ganenet will probably have said she was chased away from the palace. That's generally the way it's taught in this country. That is the way it's written in the text. So the Midrash says that she was put to death, and she was sentenced to death because of her role in stopping the building of the Beit HaMikdash. So why was Achashverosh not put to death? He was the one who officially stopped it. Even if it's on her advice, it's in his name. Says the translator, this is all in the Targum, that he was not put to death because he had to be kept alive. It says, by the way, that his life was shortened a little bit, but he couldn't be put to death immediately. He had to be kept alive because he was destined to marry Esther, who is the daughter of Sarah, who lived for 127 years, and therefore Esther has to rule over 127 provinces. What's the connection? So really, this definitely should have woken up the students of Rabbi Akiva, and it certainly wakes us up, and we're now asking ourselves, or we should be sort of scratching our heads, what is the connection between Sarai Imeinu and Esther HaMalkah? I'm not sure that I would have thought these two stories were connected, but having heard this teaching of Rabbi Akiva, I started to think about it. And then we start to consider the two stories in a completely new light. So listen to this and consider. An extraordinarily beautiful woman is exiled from her land, taken against her will to the king's palace, where she concealed her true identity, and the king desired her for her beauty. Her husband was esteemed as a king by the nations of the world. She had deep faith in Hashem, and through her prayers achieved salvation. The woman is called by more than one name in Tanakh, and as her story progresses, she transforms from a quiet, passive woman who does what she's told to an assertive woman who takes proactive measures to impact the future. She remains a model of modesty and righteousness to this day. Whose story have I just told? They are so intrinsically connected. You have two women who serve as the bookends of Tanakh, the beginning of the story of the Jewish people in Tanakh, and the end of the story of the Jewish people in Tanakh. And there is so much of their lives that overlaps. So now what I'd like to do is take these similarities point by point and try to build a sort of comprehensive picture of the intersection of their lives, and obviously to try to determine what message this has for us. Chazal teach us there were 4 beautiful women in the world. Source number 3, Tanu Rabbanan, Arba Nashim Yefefiyot Hayu Ba'olam. Sarah, and then Abigail and Rachav are the two in the middle. One version says Abigail and Rachav, a different version says Rachav Abigail. Interesting topic, but not ours. Esther. So the bookends, again, are Sarah and Esther. Maharsha asks a question on this Gemara. Arba nashim yefefiyot hayu ba'olam? Really? There are only 4? Doesn't the Torah itself tell us Rachel Imeinu was beautiful? V'sha'ar nashim matzinu kayotze bahem yifat Torah v'yifat mar'eh? There are other women who are described as beautiful in Tanakh. What is this midrash in the Gemara saying, there are only 4 beautiful women? So he answers the question by saying, there was something about these 4 women. Kabbalah hayalahem dedalid nashim elu lo hayu kayotze bahen biyofi. There's something otherworldly about the beauty of these 4. There's something that's beyond normal, okay, even, so we say, Rachel was also extraordinarily beautiful. But their beauty, the beauty of these 4, surpassed the most beautiful woman that we could imagine. Not even, seen, obviously, they were more beautiful then. Closer to Briat HaOlam, closer to Hashem, more beautiful. But there was something otherworldly about the beauty of these 4 women, and particularly Sarah and Esther, we're going to focus on. And what we want to understand is why is this beauty so important? Why is it significant? How does it impact on their stories? The first time we see the beauty of Sarah mentioned is not when we're introduced to her. So Rachel, we're told right off the bat in the beginning of her story, she's beautiful. Sarah, we're not told about her beauty till well into the story. She's already married to Abraham. They've already entered Eretz Yisrael. There's a famine in the land, and they're going down to Mitzrayim. And on their way down to Mitzrayim, Abraham turns to his wife and says, Hinei na yadati ki isha yifat mar'e'at. Behold, now I know you're a beautiful woman. Now I have known, it's a difficult phrase to translate. Hinei na means now, this moment. Hinei usually means well, lo and behold, something I didn't know before, something unexpected is going on. So we have this hinei na, something unexpected now, yadati, past tense, I knew. So how do you put these together? Hinei na yadati, ki isha yifat mar'e'at, that you're a beautiful woman. So Rashi gives several midrashic explanations, but he explains according to the Pshat, now your beauty is a matter of concern. I've known all along that you're beautiful, but it's never been an issue. It's never been something that's like even relevant to our relationship. We're going down to Mitzrayim now. People are going to notice you because your beauty. Your beauty is going to attract attention. So we have to come up with a plan. How are we going to deal with the fact of your beauty in the face of what we're going to be confronted with in Mitzrayim? And Rav Soloveitchik says in Abraham's journey, it's beautiful sefer on Abraham, the life of Abraham Avinu, from the moment they crossed into Egypt, no one cared about Sarah, about her spiritual personality, her leadership, her talents and capabilities, her status as a prophetess. The Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. That's the quote from the Pasuk. The Egyptians looked at women only from one perspective, whether they're physically attractive. Therefore, they were punished, al dvar Sarai, because they degraded Sarai. She was a great and singular person by regarding her, and they regarded her as merely a comely, anonymous woman. That was the difference between the community of Abraham and the Egyptian community. Abraham looked upon his wife as Sarai, my ruler. She was not only beautiful, she was a spiritual figure on par with Abraham. How do we know this? Because when Abraham met her, what are we told? In source number 8, Vayikach Avram v'Nachor lahem nashim, Shem Eshet Avram Sarai, v'Shem Eshet Nachor, Milka, Bat Haran, Avi Milka, v'Avi Yiska. So in the beginning of the Pasuk, we were doing great, and then it got really awkward, right? Avram and Nachor, Avram the older brother, Nachor the younger brother, both took wives for themselves. Avram's wife was Sarai, Nachor's wife was Milka, who was the daughter of Haran, who was the father of Milka and the father of Yiska. Gets really awkward there, right? Like, where's the editor? So Chazal say, Yiska is Sarah. That Haran is the father of Milka and Yiska. Yiska is Sarah. Her name is changed. She's called Yiska, and you know, so you have there Rashi quotes, Yiska zo Sarah. So why is she called Yiska if it's Sarah? Al Shem shesocha b'ruach hakodesh. Because from the shoresh sacha, which is related to lehistakel, she saw prophetically. She had vision beyond normal vision. She had spiritual vision, saw things b'ruach hakodesh. Also, hakol sochin b'yafya, everyone looked at her because she was so beautiful. Ve'od Yiska lashon nesichut, moreover, Yiska is from the same root as nesicha, which means a princess. Sarah means a princess. So she was called interchangeably Sarah and Yiska, like people are called Zvi Hirsch. Sarah Sprinza, not so much. But Dover, that sort of two names that mean the same thing. Okay. The later Mefarshim, the commentators on Rashi, focus on the first explanation, that she was called Yiska because of her prophetic ability. And the Maharal has a beautiful teaching here, and he says that a woman, I'm going to read, just paraphrase, the sources are here for those who want to spend more time with them in Hebrew afterwards. The Maharal says that every woman has two aspects. She is who she is intrinsically, when she is born to her father, and then when she gets married, her personality evolves, and her husband brings out more of her. He kind of makes more of who she is through her relationship with him. So Sarah was called Yiska as her father's daughter, and that's why it's Haran, Avi Milka, Avi Yiska. Haran was the father of Milka and of Yiska. Because to him, she was Yiska. That's who she was intrinsically. As a Neviah, that's not who she is because of Abraham. Her prophetic ability was greater than that of Abraham. Hashem says to Abraham, Shma b'kola, because her Nevuah is greater than yours. So as a Neviah, she's Yiska. That's who she is to her father from her birth. When she marries Abraham, she becomes Sarai, later Sarah, because he's the one who takes her kochot, her spirituality, and he takes her from being this introverted, reflective, quietly spiritual person, and he helps her turn her kochot outwards, and she becomes an outreach professional like him. And she's able to take that, those kochot, those spiritual kochot, and reach out to others because of who she became alongside him. The Be'er Basadeh, another commentary on Rashi, says that we see this clearly in the pasuk because how are the children listed? Avram is the older brother, Nachor is the younger brother. Then the children of Haran are Avi Milcah, Avi Yiska. Milcah seems to be the older daughter and Yiska the younger. So Avram, the older brother, married Yiska, the younger daughter. That's not usually done, right? That was the whole Lavan argument. No, we can possibly marry off the younger before the older, like it's not done in our society. So how come it happened here? So he explains that it's because of her Yiska-ness, because he saw in her that quality of she sees things Beruach HaKodesh, she is this spiritual personality, she's the one I want. And as the older brother, he got to choose first. So he chose the younger sister. And then Nachor, the younger brother, had no choice but to marry the sister who remained, because you can't leave the older sister unmarried while the younger sister is married. So again, Avram, the older brother, married Yiska, the younger sister. Two brothers married two sisters.
No, I got it. I just want to know why that didn't happen with Rachel and Leah. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's
If it's done already, let's do it twice.
Great question. Hold that. Bezrat Hashem. We'll have a chance to come back to it. Okay. For our purposes, we have this idea that Yiska, she is a spiritual personality inherently, and she becomes Sarai upon her marriage. This is the name change. We see Esther also has two names. Hadassah, he Esther. Right? Now, there is a long discussion in the Gemara which name came first, right? So you have the Gemara in source number 13. Vayhi omenet Hadassah, kare le Hadassah, kare le Esther. She's called both Hadassah and Esther. Tanya Rabbi Meir Omer, Esther Shma, that Esther really is who she is. And why was she called Hadassah? Al Shem HaTzadikim shenikru Hadassim. It's based on a pasuk in Zechariah. Hadassim represents tzidkut, righteousness. So because of her righteousness, which was constant, she was called Hadassah. So Esther is her given name, and Hadassah is sort of the name that she took on because of her behavior. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the opposite, Hadassah Shma, Velama Nikret Shma Esther, Al Shem Sha'ita Masteret Dvareha. She hid things, right? She did not tell who she was. She didn't reveal Ein Esther Magedet et Ama ve'et Moladata, right? Just as Mordechai told her, don't reveal your lineage, don't reveal who you are. Rabbi Nehemiah says, Hadassah Shma Velama Nikret Esther, because the nations of the world called her Esther al Shem Ishtahar. There's a star, like the North Star is called Ishtahar, and that's why she was called Esther, because her beauty, she glowed like the star. And Ben Azai says, Esther means it's low, it's really, she was Esther. He seems to indicate that her name was Esther, but she was called Hadassah because a Hadassah is neither too long nor too short. It's Benonit, and she had this, it's not to say, Khalila, that she was average in any way, but what it means is that, and the Maharal talks about this, that she was like the perfect harmony, the perfect like middle ground that was not too extreme. She was never, sometimes people who are very extreme can be off-putting. Somebody who's like extremely, extremely quiet is hard to read, hard to communicate with, or somebody who's like so out there is like so much. But she was like just the perfect median, harmonious personality that everybody could relate to. So she wasn't too much of one thing or another. Everybody connected to Esther somehow. So with her, it's a little bit less clear which name she takes on and which was her given name. But definitely there is this idea that she is one thing intrinsically, and then through her behavior or interactions, she is called a second name. And there is the sense that really, it doesn't really matter so much which came first, the chicken or the egg, or which came first, it's Hadassah or Esther, but they both reflect a certain constancy, a certain righteousness, a certain sense of, we are talking about a personality, someone who knows very strongly who she is, and no matter where she goes, she carries that with her. And that's really based, that's kind of the Alshech in source number 14. And interestingly, Rav Yigal Ariel in his sefer on Esther. It's called Mor V'Hadas. Right? It's on Esther and Daniel. And in his sefer, he says that her name was changed when she entered the palace. Doesn't seem that way from the story. It's a little bit of a departure because when she's introduced to us already as Mordechai fostered her, Hadassah, he Esther, that it seems like she may already have had both of those names. But he says that it was the name that, one of them was a name that was given to her upon entering the palace. And again, it doesn't really matter so much which was which, but we see this idea that, because really they both reflect similar ideas, and we see the constancy of her behavior, and we see that who she was on the inside is also how other people saw her. Like that's her strength, Esther's strength, is that they saw her, they didn't exactly know what they were seeing, but they knew that they were seeing something very, very special. Okay. In terms of the beauty being that which drew attention, so Sarai, why does Abraham say, let them think that you're my sister? We'll tell everyone that you're my sister. So Rav Aviner explains that Abraham's goal was he wanted the Mitzrim to see that he treats his wife as if she is his sister. In their society, a wife was an object, right? A wife is just there to take care of his needs. And a sister is like, don't you touch my sister. She's to be respected. And he wanted the Mitzrim to see that to Abraham, his wife is like his sister in that respect. But yes, she's my wife, but I still treat her as she is a person. She is somebody who deserves honor and respect. And this is the sense that here the plan didn't work. So why didn't it work? Because Abraham thought that like when he would come down to Mitzrayim, the officers would see her, and that by saying that she's his sister, they would feel like, okay, hands off, and that would be the end of the story. And he didn't realize that, wow, her beauty is so profound that they're going to say, well, she's so beautiful, she's only fit for Paro, and she's going to be taken straight to the house of Paro. Whereas with Esther, it's also like she was taken to the house of Achashverosh. This is like clearly a situation in which women also are being completely objectified, but there's no way of keeping her from that situation. And they both find themselves in the palace of the king because of their beauty, where they're regarded only as beautiful objects. And what we see here now is sort of a significant difference between how the two stories play out, in that Sarah is immediately rescued by Hashem, right? A miracle happens, and Paro is smitten or stricken by a plague and realizes it's Al Dvar Sarai and returns her to Abraham without having touched her, whereas Esther plays out very, very differently. So that is something that we will have to look at a little bit more closely. There is one aspect of Esther's beauty, though, that is questioned by the Gemara. Anybody know the Midrash? I'm actually surprised that nobody said, wait, she was beautiful. She's so beautiful. How could she be so beautiful? Doesn't the Gemara say that she was green? Right? The Gemara says, that same Gemara that talks about, right, Esther being Hadassah, because she was green, like a Hadass. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korach Omer, it's in source number 16, Esther yirak roket haita, v'chut shel chesed mashuch aleha. That she was green, but she somehow, Hashem made her appealing in the eyes of those who beheld her, despite the fact that she was green. Now, what does that mean that she was green? She was she, like Kermit the Frog? It's not easy being green? Like that's... Clearly, there's more to it than that. So the Maharal explains that green, and this is his, again, Maharal is always exalts the quality of being in the middle. The Shvil HaZahav, everything in moderation, the Benoni, the median. So he says green, and I'm not an artist, so I don't know Maybe somebody can tell us if this is so, but green is the midpoint between black and white. So that's what the Maharal says. So that, I don't know, it's on the color wheel, or anybody, an artist who can tell us? No? Okay, green, says the Maharal, is the midpoint between black and white, and it's consistent with this idea that Esther, this is a personality trait. It's not that she was green to her, like, oh, wicked, right? The witch, that's the current thing. It's like, she wasn't green like Elphaba, maybe that's more current than Kermit the Frog, but she was green. It's a personality trait that she had a certain evenness, harmonious quality to her personality. And that's why she was attractive. It made her more attractive, not less attractive. So lest we think that her greenness made her less attractive, we shouldn't think so. Then the Maharal gets into a very interesting discussion and says, how old was Esther at the time of the story of Megillat Esther? So he quotes a midrash. Rav amar bat 40 hayta, u'Shmuel amar bat 80 hayta, Rabbanan amrin bat 74. So 74, and then that also gets into like 74. The way we get to this calculation is, when was Esther born? So the Chazal say there's a midrash that says that she was born at the time of the Churban. And that's why Ein la ava'im, she has no parents, because her father was killed at the time of the Churban, defending Yerushalayim, and her mother died in childbirth shortly thereafter. So if she's born at the time of the Churban, and now the second Beit HaMikdash is already, the building of the second Beit HaMikdash has already begun and been stopped, there are 4 sets of 70 years that are possible, depending on when you count from, but we're close to the end of that time period. So depending on which 70 years, she's not 14, she's not so young. I'm just throwing out a number. She's not so young, right? She's clearly not so young. However, the Maharal says, the Megillah calls her a Na'ara. So it's very confusing. And if she's called a Na'ara, then she must have been young. So what do we do with all these numbers? And Chazal by coming up with these numbers, they have a reasonable concern, because really, mathematical calculation, she should be up there in years. Like even 40 would be difficult to explain. It's really probably closer to 74, 75, even 80. And yet she's called a Na'ara. So he says, well, if it says Na'ara, we can't contradict the pshat. Must be that she was young somehow. He, I guess, doesn't hold by the other midrash. But the numbers that are mentioned here, 40, 74, which is close to 75, or 70, are all numbers that are associated with chachma, with wisdom. And he says that is, so Esther, even as a young person, had wisdom beyond her years. She had the ability to see Beruach HaKodesh, very much like Sarah, right? She sees beyond the surface. She sees beyond the moment. She's able to see like what's going to happen down the road, and we have to take action to protect ourselves into the future. We said that the difference between them is that Sarah saw salvation immediately, and Esther had to wait a very long time. We know that Esther was in the palace for years before the Purim story. And the Mizmor, for those who are doing Nach Yomi, right? On Shabbat, we just learned Mizmor Chaf Bet, Lamnatzeach al Ayelet HaShachar, Keili, Keili, Lama Azavtani. She felt abandoned by Hashem, forsaken, right? Rachok mishuati, divrei sha'agati. I'm crying out to you, but salvation is far away. This took a long time. How does this match up? So the Midrash in Breshit Rabbah, in source number 20, V'cholo tohalayla, the night that Sarai Imeinu was taken to the house of Paro, Hayta Sarah shtucha al paneha, ve'omeret, Ribon ha'olamim, Avraham yatsa behavdacha, ve'ani yatzati be'emuna. Avraham yatsa chutz lasira, ve'ani betoch hasira. Sarah cried out to Hashem, and she said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avraham Avinu knows with certainty that somehow this is all, he's going to have a child and his child will inherit the land. You promised him. You didn't promise me. I only heard it from him. I rely only on my emunah. I am turning to you now from a place only of emunah. I have no guarantees. Moreover, Avraham is chutz lasira. Okay, I'm sure it's not pleasant for him that his wife was taken to Beit Paro, but I'm here in the house of Paro. Right? He's the one, he's knocking on my bedroom door. I'm the one who's really at risk here. And I am turning to you and pleading with you, get me out of here, save me. I trust you to save me. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kol ma she'ani oseh b'shvilecha ani oseh. And the Eitz Yosef on the Midrash explains that what Hashem means by this is, I am going to save you in the merit of your tefillah. Not because of him, but you're right. You're right. Your emunah, the fact that you are calling to me from a place just of emunah, no guarantees, that's greater, more meritorious than all the promises that I made to Abraham and all the tefillot of Abraham. Your tefillah is going to be what's going to carry the day. Emunah carries the day. Your tefillah is the one I'm responding to you. Esther calls out to Hashem, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. And the Midrash interprets her tefillah as follows in source number 23. Lama nishtanu alai sidro shel olam v'siduran shel imahot. Why have you changed the order of the world in my situation? Why am I different from the imahot? Ma Imeinu Sarai al yedei shenishbet el paro laila achat lakach hu v'kol beito lakach hu v'kol beito shneimar vayinagah Hashem et paro. Sarai Imeinu spent one night in the house of Paro, and he was immediately stricken. Ani she'ani netuna betoch cheiko shelo TORAH kol hashanim halalu. All these years, I've been locked in the embrace of this Rasha. Ein ata osei mi nisim, no miracle. Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. Why have you forsaken me? Mi betani mi, Keli ata. I have placed my faith in you since I was in the womb. Lama shalosh pe'amim amra Esther lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ribono shel olam shalosh mitzvot natatali nida v'chala v'hadlakat ner. These are the mitzvot associated with Sarai Imeinu specifically, especially all women, but especially Sarai Imeinu, who had the candle lit in her house and the challah stayed fresh on the table and the anan over the ohel representing Tarat HaMishpacha. She says, I am faithful to all the teachings of Sarai Imeinu. I am trying to live the life taught by Sarai Imeinu, modeled by Sarai Imeinu. And even in the house of this Rasha, I'm trying to keep all these things. Where are you? Why are you not responding to me? Chazal say that if we look at the beginning of the Mizmor Tehillim associated with Esther, Lam natseach al ayelet hashachar, lama nimshila Esther lashachar. What does she have to do with the breaking of the dawn? Lomar lecha ma shachar sof kol halayla af Esther sof kol hanisim. Just as dawn is the end of the night, Esther is the end of miracles. Does that make sense to you? As dawn, remember analogies on the SATs? They don't have them anymore because we don't want our kids to think too hard. So go back with me. As dawn is to the night, dawn ends the night, Esther is the end of miracles. So you're comparing Esther to the dawn and the end of the night to the end of miracles. Does that work? No. Because what does night usually represent? Darkness, exile. So the end of miracles should be the beginning of the night. Right? If it's the dawn, the morning, that should be the beginning of miracles. How do we resolve this? And how does this relate to Esther's tefillah? Esther is the end of open and revealed miracles and the beginning of hidden miracles. which seem like the night. It seems like we're in the nighttime, but it's the end of that period. The first answer is actually brought in the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is a little bit different, but it's become famous because there's a song that everybody sings these days. Rabbi Chia Ruba, Rabbi Shimon Bar Chalafta, Iyun Mahalchin Behadak Bikat Arbel. They were walking up in the Galil at Arbel, and they saw the Ayelet HaShachar, the dawn breaking. And one said to the other, Kachi Geulatan Shel Yisrael B'tchila Kim'a Kim'a Kol Shehi Holechet U'Meir. So that dawn breaks very slowly. You see a little bit of light, and a little bit more light, a little bit more light. I live in Mitzpeh Yerichel. I watch the sunrise every morning over Yam HaMelech, or Bikat HaYarden. And so, yeah, it's like a little bit light, a little bit more light, a little bit more, and it's like Geula is coming. So that, he says, how does this relate to Sof Kol HaNisim? That's how the Nisim, Sof Nisim, it's like a B'chiyeshev b'choshech Hashem orli, that when I'm sitting in utter darkness, and the darkest time of night is when? Just before dawn. So the Gemara is implying that miracles come just before, like the end of miracles is the end of the night. The end, meaning that miracles, kind of read it, flip, the miracles end the night. That it's and we see, and the miracles don't necessarily happen. The ultimate Geula is not going to happen in a big flash of light, but a little bit of light, and a little bit more light, a little bit more light, like disturbances in the night, like a king who can't sleep, and strange dreams, and strange things start to happen that are inexplicable, and that will be the light at the end of the night. But the Bnei Yissaschar says that it really is, it's the end of open miracles and the transition to hidden miracles. And whenever you have a transition in nature, there's always something that has some characteristics of one and some characteristics of the other. So like a frog is a good example of that, right? A frog starts out as a tadpole, it swims in the water, and then it becomes a land creature once it evolves to the next stage. So that's like the transitional thing in nature between water creatures and land creatures. There's always a transition. So he says Esther was the transition from the open miracles of Tanakh to the hidden miracles that accompany us throughout Jewish history and continue up until this day. And this is it's a nes that is bilavush hateva. He is actually quite, he uses strong language, and he says, like, you could read Megillat Esther, and only a complete fool would say that these are all natural events. Like we always say, oh, Esther, yeah, it just reads like a series of coincidences. But he says at some point you're reading this whole series of coincidences, and you have to sit up and say, 1 second, this can't possibly be just a series of coincidences. Everybody, like we obviously, we read it that way because we're trained to read it that way. But even the most uneducated person reading this story will have to sit up at some point and say, this can't possibly be coincidence. And when we have that many coincidences, that's clearly a sign that Hashem is at work here. You heard earlier, Esther min HaTorah minayin, Anochi haster astir. It's a reference to the pasuk of hiddenness, Hashem's hidden presence. But when we talk about Hashem's hidden presence, we are meant to focus not on the hiddenness, but on the presence. That, yes, Hashem's presence is hidden, but he's there. The whole message that Hashem is sending with Haster Astir Panai, that even when you're in Galut, I will be there. You won't see me, but I'm there. That's the Haster Astir. Not that I'm not there. It's I'm there, but I'm hidden. Know that I will be there with you. And that's the Haster Astir, is this time, especially at a time of double Hastara, like the story of Purim, which we feel like we're living through again, where there is the one level of Hastara of being in Galut to begin with. And then there are the additional decrees and the additional threats that we face from day to day. And Hashem says, I am absolutely there with you, and I'm there with you in the merit of emunah. And that's where Esther finds comfort in the answer that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Sarai Imeinu. When Sarai cried out to him and says, I'm turning to you with emunah, and Hashem answers her and says, yes, and in the merit of emunah, I'm going to save you. And Esther has to wait longer because she's at that transitional time. She's at a time of Hester Panim. She's at a time when Hashem is not going to act openly. She's the paradigm for us. She's giving us this koach and saying, as Tanakh comes to a close, as the revealed presence of Hashem in the world becomes more and more hidden, know, take it with you, that Hashem is there, and you can turn to him. And significantly, when Esther turns to Hashem, and she says, Keli, lama azavtani. You're still my God. Right? I'm still in a personal relationship with you. I feel abandoned. I feel forsaken. But then the whole tone of the Mizmor changes. Like once you're in that conversation with Hashem, she's empowered by the conversation with Hashem. And she feels that her emunah will sustain her. And Rabbi Nachman teaches, and I've brought this many times, Daki ikar hagalut einenu ela b'shvil chesron emunah. The galut is because of a lack of emunah. And when will the galut end? When we live, when our lives are an expression of emunah. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, vayihi yadav emunah, his hands became emunah. It's not just, obviously, we read it as his hands were a symbol of emunah, but not just a symbol. His very hands were emunah. And when we turn to Hashem in tefillah, from that place of heartfelt emunah, that's when the relationship becomes restored. At the time of Haman, the nations were able to have the upper hand for a short time because yeshno am echad. The language of Haman, he said, Yeshno am echad. What's this? Yeshno. Yesh am echad. Yeshno am echad, because he was bringing libel against them, saying, Yashnu min ha-mitzvot. They're sleeping. They're asleep. They're sleeping, they're doing mitzvot. If they're doing mitzvot at all, it's just mitzvot anashim melumada. Like they're just out of habit. They're not thinking about it, not in a thoughtful way, not in a meaningful way. It's not an expression of emunah, it's just rote behavior. The antidote to that is when Esther says, Lech knoset kol hayudim, get everyone together, vitsumu alai, make a dedicated effort, a conscious effort to turn to Hashem and restore our relationship with Hashem. The Kedushat Levi on Purim teaches, V'hinei hayazeh b'zchut Mordechai ve'Esther. The rebuilding of the second Beit HaMikdash was in the merit of Mordechai and Esther. What's the connection? Shehaman amar Elokehem yashenhu. Haman said, their God is sleeping, they're sleeping, their God is sleeping, their relationship is over. Kevan shecharav Beit HaMikdash, ein lahem liYisrael levatel gzeirot ra'ot ulehovcham letov. From the time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, it's finished. They have no more koach to change history. They can't change gzeirot. Whatever happens in the world happens, and Hashem is done with them. Ve'asah HaKadosh Baruch Hu nes, but Hashem performed a miracle at the time of Purim to teach us sheyesh lanu uletiferet Yisrael koach b'tfilatenu uv'ma'asenu levatel gzeirot kashim v'ra'im ve'yesh lanu koach gadol. Says the Kedushat Levi, we still have that power today. Esther represents the fact that this power accompanies us into Galut. The koach of Sarai Imeinu, and that she took with her as a daughter of Sarai Imeinu, and so many parallels, so many overlaps in their lives. It's not an accident. It's because Hashem wanted her to show us. Just as Sarai Imeinu stood for us at the beginning of our history, Esther HaMalkah accompanies us into the next stage of history. And yes, Sarah initiated a stage in history in which Hashem would act with us openly and through revealed miracles. And Esther initiates a stage in history, which we're still in today, in which Hashem interacts with us in a hidden way. But he's there. And we have the same power we had then to overturn evil gzerot by turning to Hashem be'emunah with tefillah and ma'asim tovim. And we should hopefully see the results. Someone said every encounter with, I heard this on Shabbos, every encounter with Amalek results in a Yeshua, in a tremendous Yeshua. We went from Milchemet Amalek to Ma'amad Har Sinai. We went from the Shoah to Medinat Yisrael. And this encounter with Amalek should end very soon with the building of the Beit HaMikdash.